Well, the fantasy persists on Ukraine, despite the fact that Ukraine appears to be losing Avdiivka, which will deny them any ability to launch strikes on Donetsk city. And it pretty much, I mean, it would be, I would say, the most devastating blow of the war. But we have some talk of negotiations in a back channel. Putin has put out feelers to the U.S. via indirect channels to signal he's open to talks for ending Russia's war in Ukraine, including potentially on future security arrangements for Ukraine. According to Kremlin sources, what do you make of this, Aaron?
Well, I mean, I don't know if it's true or not, but what I know is that there have been a series of these reports in U.S. outlets now saying that Putin has been putting out feelers. The New York Times recently reported that Putin put out a feeler to the U.S. back in September 2022. So months after the U.S. blocked the April 2022 peace deal reached in Turkey between Russia and Ukraine, Putin, again, according to the New York Times, put out a new feeler in September. That was ignored, and Blinken has gone around the world since claiming that he's seen no signs of any interest in meaningful diplomacy from Russia. And what he means by meaningful diplomacy is basically bowing to U.S. demands, which means basically giving up Russia's security interests in Ukraine and caring about the Russian-speaking population of Ukraine that's been under assault since the Maidan coup of 10 years ago next month. We're coming up on the 10th anniversary of the Maidan coup. So Blinken, just like in Gaza, has been, sabotaging any meaningful opportunity for diplomacy and for peace. And these reports continue to come out that Putin is open to talks, but he's not going to get anything because this Biden administration, I think their only game plan is to delay Ukraine's defeat until after they're up for re-election in November 2024. I think that's the only thing they really care about. And meanwhile, in the meantime, it's leading to things like this. There was just this huge tragedy where a Russian military plane was shot down by Ukraine, killing everybody on board, including 65 Ukrainian prisoners of war who were being taken by Russia for a prisoner exchange. And Ukraine initially claimed credit for shooting down the plane and said, but then when Russia said that actually you shot down your own people, then Ukraine started denying it and then started claiming that the plane was only carrying Russian missiles. And now Ukraine is accusing Russia of lying about it, which is a pretty extraordinary allegation. But if what Russia is saying is true, and it looks to me like it is, then Ukraine just killed 65 of its own soldiers. So these are the kind of tragedies that keep occurring the longer this war continues.
There are allegations by Russia, which, I mean, this appears very valid, that it was downed by a NATO weapon, a Patriot missile or an Iris missile, which I believe is supplied by Germany. And you can see in that video we showed, it looks like there does appear to be some kind of surface-to-air missile going up. This was over. Was it fired from Kharkiv towards Belgorod?
Exactly, towards Belgorod. I don't know where it's fired from, but definitely in Belgorod, which is
pretty sure it was fired
region of Russia.
Okay, and then here's another aspect to this shoot down. According to a preliminary report, there were Azov members transported for exchange today on the plane allegedly shot down by Ukraine inside Russia. And, I've spoken to some Ukrainians and Russians about this, just asking them questions, and they said they believe this to be the case. Zelensky will have a lot of explaining to do to Ukrainian nationalists after this. And then I've seen like the NAFO crowd, the fellas actually denying that any prisoners were on the plane and claiming that only 5 members of the crew were killed. But, if there were, like, as they say, like 12 members of Azov on the flight, then we have to go back to an incident we discussed on this stream last year, which was when a POW camp in the Donbass, I believe, was attacked by Ukrainians in order to kill all of the Azov members who had been held up there, who were captured during the Azovstal siege in Mariupol, who are like the hardest of the hardcore Azov, who represent not only, a threat to all ethnic Russians in that area and to Russia, but also to Zelensky Zelensky sees them as this, extremely dangerous entity or element in his midst. And so they eliminated them. They also wanted them eliminated so they couldn't talk. So did Ukraine employ a version of the Hannibal Directive to eliminate these prisoners of war for political reasons? What do you think, Aaron?
I mean, I don't know. I also could just see this as just total incompetence on the part of Ukraine.
Yeah.
These things happen, and it just underscores to me just what a futile war this is. Russia has right now between 18 and 20% of Ukrainian territory. The counteroffensive was a massive failure. Russia's demands from the start, contrary to all the propaganda we get, I think were reasonable or at least negotiable, but there's been no interest in that from the Biden administration. And even if Zelensky were interested in such negotiations, as he was for a brief moment in the spring of 2022, when he reached a tentative peace deal with Russia, he's boxed in by the Biden administration on the one side, and then the ultranationalists on the other, who have threatened to kill him. So unless Washington changes its policy, this war and the tragedies just go on.
You're right that it could be incompetence, and it would make sense given how undermanned the Ukrainian military is at this point. They're trying to throw fresh meat into the grinder, and that means poorly trained personnel manning sophisticated NATO batteries. To man a Patriot missile battery, it requires millions of dollars of training and months of training alone, which is why we said from the beginning that sending the Patriot battery or batteries was never going to change the state of play. As you know, I'm having all these recovered memories of U.S. media hyping up Zelensky coming to Washington and getting one Patriot battery. And so many of the civilian casualties we see in Ukrainian cities come from misfired surface-to-air missiles, anti-aircraft missiles, or anti-aircraft missiles that explode in midair, and the shrapnel falls on apartment blocks, as we saw in Dnipro late last year, earlier last year. So there's no way out. The die is cast. It's over. But as Biden and Blinken have openly said, sending all the weapons to Ukraine, they're all complaining now nonstop. The Republicans are holding it up over the border because Trump wants to keep this border crisis going. Well, they want to keep this Ukraine crisis going. Exactly. And part of the reason they want to keep it going is for money. They openly say it. They're job creators.
Yep.
The arsenal of democracy.
Yeah, Blinken recently talked about what a great thing this is because it creates so many American jobs. As if there aren't other ways to create U.S. jobs aside from making more weapons of death for a futile proxy war. It's like all of a sudden they become like new dealers when there's an opportunity to make weapons. And it shows what a racket this is because the weapons of Ukraine, because the weapons that are being sent to Ukraine, Ukrainians have complaining that they're inadequate, they're old, because a lot of this basically is the U.S. shipping Ukraine its old equipment and then using the money that it gets from the American people to replenish the U.S. stockpile with new weapons. So it's like as Julian Assange talked about, it's a racket for the U.S. military-industrial complex, and everybody pays the price. Yeah, exactly.
Where do all the Bradleys go? All the Bradley Stryker vehicles. Yeah, the old ones from the Gulf War got sent to Ukraine. It's like when you go to Central America, they what do they call it? Like paquete clothes. Basically, the U.S. sends like piles and piles of old clothes that people throw away down there in these packets. And then you see like little kids like are walking around with like shirts relating to some cookout, some like Polish family's cookout in Wisconsin. And but you do get some cool vintage clothes too. Like a lot of the stores in Managua, for example, have really cool like hipster ironic shirts. And it's all paquete. That's what the Ukrainians are getting from the Pentagon is like paquete weapons. It's just basically junk. And then the money comes back here to the contractors, the Beltway bandits, and they buy up real estate in places like the Washington, D.C. suburbs, jack up prices and build all these luxury apartments around DC. And then the poor and working class population here gets pushed out. So it's just such a disgusting economic model. And it's what Biden and Blinken are openly promoting as the arsenal of democracy. It's the arsenal of oligarchy. It's the arsehole of oligarchy.